Ready to go? Yes. Okay, fabulous. Hi everyone, thank you all so much for being here today at the final talk of the Orchard Workshop and Conference Series. Today we're going to be talking about the queer scene, both in the history, present, and also looking in the future. My name is Yasmeen, and I'm super excited to be bringing on these two lovely guests. We've got Suzy Mason speaking today. I'm going to ask them both to introduce themselves, but very briefly. Suzy is someone who did a lot for the queer scene in Leeds, particularly in the 80s. You might have heard of Speedqueen. 90s, sorry. And then we also have Micheal Upson, who founded Love Muscle, iconic club night here in Leeds. So, Suzy, if you just want to say a couple of things about yourself.
Well, basically, I grew up in Leeds and in the 80s, and it was a very different city from what it is now. It was very dangerous. I grew up with the Yorkshire Ripper at large, and so really there was not very many places to go out. It wasn't safe. There wasn't what you call a queer scene then. It was just, there were some gay nights, some gay spaces that were underground and hidden, and men and women were separate. Ladies' nights were kind of a thing. So, and then the dance scene came like early 90s, and everybody just started raving and going to all these illegal parties, and it was life-changing. And so I started doing all of that, and then for a couple of years, and then realised that I really wanted to create something that was just not a great big kind of random event where there was no kind of personal, nobody cared about anybody's safety there. It was just a big free-for-all and at the rave. So I just decided that I wanted to start a club that was a really safe space and like creative and with loads of artists and musicians, and really it was just that, you know, and it just kind of escalated. And as soon as I started, I realised that the infrastructure in the clubs in Leeds, you know, it was just full homophobia, full sexism, misogyny, and I was like, nobody's going to do anything about it. So I kind of took it on as a personal quest, really, and that was 30 years ago, and I was working right up until, I think the last party we did was 2019, just before the pandemic. So yeah, it did change the city a lot, so and had a lot of fun.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Micheal. I run Love Muscle, which is a queer club night. I grew up in Birmingham. I moved to Leeds in 2007. So I hit the tail end of, I think Speedqueen had finished the year before. So when I came to Leeds, there really wasn't a sort of electronic or alternative music queer scene that existed here. There was some punk stuff. And Wharf Chambers existed as the commonplace, where they did a lot of bands, but not necessarily dance music. And I suppose spent the majority of my time at uni not really having that sort of queer group of friends, and came to my end of my time at uni, had a amazing time, some great nights here, and then was at a bit of a crossroads of, I'm either going to stay here and try and set something up or leave and go to London, and started a club night, and people just came out of the woodwork. It was obviously, people felt the same as I did. And it was a gradual process over sort of 6 months, but we had a big queue around the corner, and the rest is history. But I owe a lot to Suzy, and I think Lucy Lockett, if you know Lucy Lockett, who DJs for us. Lucy used to work at Speedqueen, and that legacy that Suzy left kind of set us up to do what we're doing today. And also Vague as well, which you were involved in. But, yeah.
Fab. I feel like you might have touched on this already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. But what was your first queer club experience like, where you walked in and you were like, God, things can be different, whether it was in Leeds or anywhere else? Suzy, if you want to start.
Well, it wasn't in Leeds. My first clubbing experience was going to the Warehouse and the Phonographique in Leeds in the 80s, and that was where I saw alternative people, because then it wasn't about being queer, it was about being alternative. So he had a big goth scene. So anybody that was different, so to speak, would become a goth or post-punk and go into those scenes, and that's where all kind of gay people went as well, because they were they're just more open and tolerant spaces, and that's where I kind of, and you could dress however you wanted without getting laughed at, and that was kind of a big thing as well back in Leeds then. So people were very separated into mainstream clubs and these Phonographic and the Warehouse were these two alternative clubs. But I did start going to gay clubs because it wasn't kind of, didn't feel fulfilled. But what I found going to gay clubs was much as I was very safe, and they were very colourful and visually beautiful. They were aimed at men. Mm-hmm. They were always aimed at men, so I was just kind of accepted, but I wasn't being specifically catered for as a woman, and that was kind of, you know, so...
That's where Speedqueen came in.
Yeah, that's where kind of, well, before that, that's where Vague came in as well. So, but I do remember going, when I first started clubbing, going to Kinky Kalinky in London and just being like, wow, you know, and seeing Lee Barron, stuff that you just don't kind of see, you know, that whole kind of underworld of just pure creativity, really.
Yeah, and how about yourself, Michael?
Yeah, I think sort of in Birmingham, in sort of like the mid-noughties, there were lots of sort of like alternative bars maybe that were like play Electro Clash, and there were sort of like queer people amongst that audience, but with no real specific place for them to go. If you wanted to go to Nightingale, you could go to Nightingale, but it would be, you know, cheesy pop music and not necessarily what I was into at the time. But I suppose two really stand out for me apart from that. One would be the NYC down at Glastonbury, and I think that really just changed my perspective on, oh wow, other queer people love this music too. Right, this we could do this in Leeds. And then the second is Berghain, and I've never felt so at home or like alive in a space. It's got a bit of I think an exclusionary door policy in as much as they kind of pick who goes in and who doesn't, and I don't really think it's necessarily the best, but it does live up to the hype. It is good.
Everyone saes the same thing. No one ever comes out and says it was a bad experience.
Lasting image, and it takes a lot for me to just like do a double take. And there was this, he must have been in his 50s, like old man, tall man, long grey hair, in an all-white gimp suit with hexagon tits, and like huge platforms, just being led around by his missus or whoever it was. And I just had to like put my jaw back up and walk on and pretend that I wasn't shocked. But yeah, so it is a wonderful place.
Yeah. And do you think your experiences within these clubs, as well as the situation that at present, you know, in your home environments, did they act as the catalyst to start up your own things? Or like, what was the moment you were like, it clicked and you're like, no, you know what? I want to do things differently, and I want to provide a space that, you know, will make people feel comfortable and listen to good music. Suzy?
Well, yeah, I was a clubber, so I was going out all over, like, say, from early clubbing, like goth clubbing in the 80s through to when I lived in London. I used to go to Hereford, and then I became like a raver, going to the service stations to all the illegal raves and parties, and so I loved it, but there was always just something that I just would come home and go, oh, wouldn't it be great if I had this, or wouldn't it be great if I had that, wouldn't it be great if this, or wouldn't it be great if that? And then I had a friend who was a promoter, and he was doing a big rave at what was Leeds Polytechnic then, it's Leeds Beckett Uni now, and they were doing these monthly raves called ARC, and I was just telling him about this perfect club that would exist. It was like, there were loads of women working there, and he just went, well, why don't you do it? And I was like, well, it's just like a fantasy. And he said, yeah, but why don't you do it? He said, why don't you just try? And anyway, we did all the artwork, me and like Paul Fry that I was working with at the time, and we took it down to this little club in Leeds. It was a big club, it had a little side room, just 200 people, and we did all the artwork and designed it all, and went in and we said, oh, we've got this idea for a night, because then you had to, all the club owners, it was a new thing, having outside promoters, and you'd have to go in and make a pitch. And they were kind of unsure of it all, because before that clubs had just been, you know, there was rock night on a Wednesday, student night on a Thursday, you know, whatever, and it was all done in-house. So, and it was gave all the artwork, and he just went, we said, oh, I've got this idea for this new night, and he just went, not interested. Didn't even look at it, just not interested. So we just left it on the bar, and walked out down the street really dejected, and then came running after us and went, I love it, it's brilliant, you can have a Tuesday night, which is like literally the worst night of the week. Do you know what I mean? He said, you've got 6 weeks to fill it. And that was the deal then. As a promoter, you were given a finite amount of time to fill it, and if you didn't fill it, you were out. And we went from a Tuesday to a Friday within about 2 months, and then Saturday night was like the night then, because there were the Sunday trading laws hadn't come in, so nobody worked on a Sunday. And and it was very intense and short because there was the licensing law, so everything had to shut at 2. So you only had a window of like 10 till 2, so it was really intense. And then we went to court, and we got the first late license in Leeds, and but we ran Saturday nights for like nearly 17 years, every single week. Yeah.
So what did you do like to attract the right audience from the beginning to keep it going? Was it a right audience to begin with?
So to start with, it was like just friends really, and like we just, obviously it was pre-digital, so it was just flyers and posters that we put all around like local businesses and and all the shops and things like that. So it was very, very glamorous, and we didn't have any door policy in the very, very early days, and then it became really, really clear very quickly that we had to have a door policy because we had a lot of very glamorous girls, and so there were lots of the rough football type boys coming in, and so we kind of had these we had this girl from Leeds University, Claudia Croft, who's she was an editor at Vogue, she's editor at 10 magazine now, and she was our very first door girl, and she would just stand on the door really and just kind of pick people, and that was kind of fundamentally important. And then we started doing drag nights just to try and discourage people from coming. We didn't ever have a problem attracting the right people. Our whole door policy for all the years we ever worked was always to stop people coming, to detract people that we didn't want, to kind of scare them away really by being a little bit controversial.
Well, you had Leeds' version of Sven at the door, but maybe a bit more glamorous than Sven. Were you about to say something, Michael? I feel like you were about to.
No, I can't remember now. But
that's
sorry.
Okay. We were just talking about like the catalyst, the moment that was just like, okay, this is what I want to do.
I definitely think. Oh no, I did remember what I was going to say. I was going
to.
We also deter people with like the world's most convoluted ticketing system. I think the more difficult you can make it for people to get a ticket to a certain degree, the more you get people who really want to be in that space. I think, similar thing. Yeah. But so the NYC download at Glastonbury was the biggest. It was for those of you if you don't know what it is, it's like Glastonbury's sort of like queer end of Glastonbury, and it's kind of grown and grown and grown over the last sort of like 10-15 years. But it's like a fake 1970s New York's like street scene that you can walk down, and like people hanging out of windows, like calling at you and stuff, trying to get you to come into the bar, and it's really cool. But the music's amazing, and it's predominantly a queer space. And it was just seeing other queer people enjoy that music that I loved, because I suppose throughout the whole time whilst I was at uni, I didn't really see that very many other people that sort of were like me in the spaces that I was hanging out. So, and then I wanted to, create something so that other people didn't have to feel like that, I think.
Yeah, just kind of going back on the ticketing policies, a lot of spaces do that in order to maintain, a safe place for their community to come into. And a lot of queer spaces and other spaces do their best to keep that going, but with a lot of, I can't remember what the data was. It was at the nighttime safety talk that we went to a couple of weeks ago, which Michael spoke at, and the Night Czar said this stat. I think maybe in the last 10 years, 50% of gay clubs in London shut down, and that's a pretty harsh reality, but it is a reality. What do you guys do or did do to stay resilient? And when you're faced with, sometimes some really difficult situations, what do you do to look after yourself during that process, but also B, how do you stay resilient and keep going?
I think the kind of the nighttime industry and like the club scene and everything, things closing down is like, there's a lot of issues around that because of general gentrification of places and ridiculous rents and stuff like that, and that's kind of another thing. But you know, if you work in nightclubs for as many years as I have, then you're going to come against a lot of stuff like that. I mean, I've worked in clubs where I've turned up and there's been no alcohol. We've had to go to Tesco. We've worked at clubs where they've been taking the sound system out because the owners haven't paid. You know, it's just like, or you'll just arrive and then they've sold the club to some leisure company and they don't want you there because you're weird and they're going to put some mainstream night in. And that has happened like so many times. You just literally have to kind of, we had to just look at ourselves like a bit like a theatre, and we just pick up, and we had really loyal staff and we had all our own decor and all our own equipment. We used to spend a whole day rigging because it was our identity and our space, and then so we could really pick up and go anywhere. But it isn't a job. If you have to have a bit of a lead stomach, and you know, there's a lot of risk as well. Kind of, there's no guarantees. There's never any guarantees that anybody will come, and you're only ever as good as your last night, and all those things that are really kind of true. So you have to kind of. You do have to, you just naturally build that resilience. But I think if you believe that what you're doing is right, and we always saw ourselves as a service in the city, and people needed it, and they told us that they needed it. So that kind of drives you, whatever knock you take, you'll just kind of get back and just make it work. And sometimes when bad things and difficult things happen, it just makes you more creative, because you can't go one way, you've got to go another. And it makes you realise that you really want it, because you get a knock and you don't stop. So, and that's kind of good to know sometimes in life, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, queer spaces are a lifeline for a lot of people. So obviously anyone who's doing it and doing it for a long time, hugely admired, because it's not easy. How about you, Michael?
Probably surrounding ourselves with a really good committee or like organising crew, I think, so that a lot of that stuff can be shared, and if people aren't feeling mentally strong, they can pass that over to somebody else who can pick that up for a little bit. I think that's what I think. Flight and Mantra, who were just on before us, were talking about exactly that sort of. It maybe not being about one person or one person's ego, or it being a shared responsibility, and the thing itself which needs to succeed. So yeah, it's probably just having a good group
I totally
of people.
agree with that. It's teamwork. It's like a family, isn't it? And that's what makes the job so pleasurable as well.
Yeah, and more fun, and making you want to put that effort in.
There are club promoters that are really ego-driven, obviously, but you know, it's all about kind of them and their personality. But they are very different types of people.
It kind of brings me on to my next question. Really, is how do you pick the people in your team to make sure that you're doing a good job? And is there a process that you have already in place? Tell us about your experiences.
I can go if you want. Yeah.
I always start, you start.
It's kind of almost like a bit of a pyramid. So you've got people that come. It's not a pyramid scheme. It's a pyramid. But people that come to the night, maybe show a bit of interest in wanting to help out, who then do bits of artwork for us. They might do a bit at the door. And then we've got sort of like a committee level, and we kind of generally tend to pull from the people who are most committed to it almost. I suppose that's where it comes from. So you know that people are committed to it almost, I suppose. But just also making sure that group of people is like as mixed and diverse group of people as possible, so you get the the experience of everybody in the room sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think working in a nightclub is not kind of a CV job necessarily, is it? So everybody that worked for us was a clubber, came to the club, just got it, wanted to be part of it, wanted to get more involved. A lot of people were like entry level into their careers, for performance artists, DJs, graphic designers, set designers, costume designers, a lot, loads and loads of people like that. So what we did was we kind of had an open door policy, and anybody could approach us with an idea of something they wanted to do. And then we kind of listened to them, and again, we did have a kind of a very clear policy of employing women, because women were so underrepresented in nightclubs right from, you know, it was very much like girls were accessories in clubs, you know, or they were podium dancers, do you know what I mean? When I started, we used to like get boys coming into the club and just going, there's a girl on the decks, like literally, like they literally couldn't believe it, you know, 30 years ago. And like, you know, so we really worked hard, you know, to kind of redress that balance and have women not just kind of, you know, in the promoting the night, but right through to the door security and every single kind of position really, that wasn't just a, you know, an accessory. So, but I don't think it's hard, you know, to kind of find a loyal team. You know, if you're doing something that's really real, I think people are naturally attracted to it. And most people in nightclubs, it's quite a transient job, so you'll find a lot of people coming and going and moving through and their, you know, their lives, so that makes it quite exciting as well.
Yeah, so if you're in this crowd and you want to be a part of something, you've got some tips right here. How do you learn best practice? What do you do? Obviously there isn't the best practice, because a lot of these issues are ongoing and they change, but where do you seek knowledge, or are there any resources or places that you go to, you know, see how you can do things differently, or just learn from others?
Well, for me, there was nothing, and I did everything that we did hadn't really been done before, certainly not in Leeds. Like, we started at Vague in '93, we started a statement of intent on the door, and we made everybody sign it, and it was just telling people that the club was for gay people, straight people, trans people, single women, all of the, just every category that had always been kind of ignored in clubland, basically. And that if anybody had a problem with that, to just go home. And we did, these kind of things hadn't happened. You had the flyer, which was kind of king, and we could stake your claim in your kind of politics there and write it down. But, you know, I'm hoping to be like in a position now where a lot of my work is kind of, that I've done, is being documented, and to kind of write some of these things down, because a lot of them are now kind of quite normal in clubland. You know, the kind of codes of conduct, and, you know, we spent years teaching people kind of how to behave respectfully. You know, and it was really weird, because there was a massive club promoter in Manchester that ran Flesh at Hacienda, and when I told him that was going to run this night, and it was going to be like a mixed night, we're going to put like all different kinds of people together that did never mix normally, he just went, you can't do it in Leeds, it'll never work. Leeds can't accept that, there'll be bloodshed. And I was just a bit like, well, I'm an ordinary girl from Leeds and I want it, so I think people will want it. And you know, and it wasn't easy. There was a lot of fighting in the very beginning, a lot of like elbows, like whose space is it? You know, and you have to work really hard. So I think we just kind of learnt instinctively what a best practice that became a kind of a standard for what people started to expect in clubland as well in Leeds, which was really important.
I guess as well, if it's community led, then the community know what they want.
Absolutely.
And
we had a really
strong
strong membership, so we empowered people and we said the club is yours. If anybody disrespects you, you have the right to have them removed from the club. And there was a whole team of us, and they could find anybody, and that was always put into practice straight away.
That's really good, yeah. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, I suppose it's learning from what people have done before, so like Suzy, but also just like other organisations in Leeds, and they might not necessarily be, you know, electronic music organisations or connected to music, but you know, Trans Leeds, Racial Justice Network. What are the local sort of organisations around you that you can learn from, and also collaborate with, maybe raise some money for, extend an olive branch out, start to build like meaningful relationships with those organisations, and you know, find out what they want, and that tends to then rub off on the people who are organising, and you kind of get to see the perspective of, you know, people that live in Leeds, sort of thing. But yeah.
Could you share an example of something that you learned and then later implemented? To put you on the spot.
I suppose it's just like so just working with Racial Justice Network, I suppose there were some incidents that happened at Wharf. We were trying to sort of form some sort of accountability, anti-racist accountability. We leaned on Racial Justice Network to do some of that work. I then ended up volunteering and working for Racial Justice Network, and then bringing some of that knowledge back into the club space and trying to do sort of like anti-racist workshops with the membership that we've got, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's really good. And sort of on the topic of security and inclusion, my next question is about how do we make queer spaces inclusive of all queers? Because I know that there is a pressure to dress up in a certain way and to look a certain way in order to feel like you can fit in. And I know people who will be discouraged from coming to events for exactly this reason. What are some of the ways that you may have addressed this in the past, in the present? Is it something that has crossed your mind? Just any thoughts on the topic would be interesting to hear. Whoever wants to go first.
I can go. I suppose we've always maintained that Love Muscle is for everybody. You know, I'm never going to say just because you're straight you can't come into that space. I think there's a couple of things that happen there. People who aren't out have a bit of anonymity in that crowd. So if you're not ready to declare whatever you are, then you can enter that space without fear of any judgment. And I suppose then that just lends into not having to dress a certain way or look a certain way to be queer or to express yourself, sort of thing. And it's absolutely encouraged. You can do as much or as little as you want in that space, but we'll never, not let somebody in because they've not got the right stilettos on.
It's hard, I think, because like even if you are a queer person and you think of these nights, you're like, okay, I assume everyone's just going to be wearing, leather head to toe, and you're like, well, I don't own any leather, so therefore I can't come in. And the reality is that not everyone is dressed that way. But I think, I don't know whether social media has a role at play here, where I know, for example, certain clubs will show that there's, different types of people dressing in different ways, and therefore they're like, oh, okay, well, I can just go in, black jeans and a black t-shirt, and as a queer person, that's completely fine. How can you kind of make that space inviting for people who don't want to dress very flamboyantly?
Well, for us, I think because we ran weekly and we were there all the time, like everybody kind of just got to know, and it was really, really important to us that we had a complete variety of people, because people have to have a space where they can dress up and really explore their identity in a way that they just can't in ordinary life. But that's not for everybody. That's not how people explore their identity, is not always through dress. So it didn't matter to us if people came in like in a pair of jeans or they were just like in a full craziest costume, whatever. But I think because they saw that, and you could the queue and everything, people just got to know. And it's who you choose to let in the club. I mean, if you have a door policy that's really kind of picky about dress, then you learn really quickly, don't you, that you're not really going to fit in. So that you state what your door policy is, and it's just about, for us it was always about people's attitude. It was just all about their kind of, and it's like what you said before, people don't want to be separated necessarily from their friends or their family because of their sexuality. For us, we were like a really, really safe space for people to come out or not come out. But I know that lots of people, their best friend wasn't gay, or they wanted to come with their sister, and they didn't, going into an all what was then like a gay space when you're not sure about anything about yourself or your family or anything is really intimidating. And I had that experience in London. I ended up in a kind of a female kind of gay pub, and I was literally terrified. Do you know what I mean? I was really young and really naive, and they just like playing cat and mouse with me. You know what I mean? And it was like, and it was actually, I was actually like, I ran out. You know what I mean? So it's like to be able to have a space where you just don't really need to decide. You can just kind of just be, and then just have that space where you naturally can kind of just find out, really, to explore.
Yeah.
And it's not about what you look like that.
I think, yeah, all too often we walk into rooms and we think, do we fit in? Are we comfortable? What kind of person do I have to be in this room, in that room?
And that's really the promoter's job, to make you, to switch that off in your brain, and so you just walk in and just think, I love it here, I feel really comfortable. Yeah. And so do my friends. That's your job. Yeah.
Talking about feeling comfortable within spaces, this next question is actually quite topical for Leeds. But what are your opinions, comments, attitudes towards securing a space and making sure everyone feels safe but without policing it? Now, a place here in Leeds hadn't had security for the longest time, but recent events have meant that they've changed their minds and attitudes. Just any comments on the topic would be really interesting to hear from the both of you.
Well, I think security is really fundamentally important, because ultimately, if you're running a night, then you are responsible for all of those people's safety inside, and lots of things can happen in a nightclub. Do you know what I mean? There's drugs, people can get ill, etc., etc. So, you can't really underestimate how important it is, and sometimes you will get a rotten apple come through that door somehow. There's the paid security by the venues, that will just kind of turn up and be like a one-size-fits-all. And we used to have to work really, really hard, and we ended up employing our own security, because just so that they understood our customers and they were sensitive to our customers and kind to our customers. And then their job wasn't about being really heavy-handed or intimidating. It was about making our customers feel safe and looking after them, and being part of the party, really, and someone to go to, So if you lost your money and you couldn't get a taxi home, they'd look after you, and, they'd look after you for other reasons. So there's another level of security. But ultimately, if something did kick off, and it could, and even if it never did, you've got to be prepared for that to happen, because it can,
And how do you find the good ones to help you?
I seduce them,
right?
You find, well, there's always somebody, isn't there? That's
what was the test?
We had doormen that would literally turn up at Vague, and they'd last half an hour and they'd walk off the job. Okay. They would just walk off. They was like, fuck off, not staying here, you're all weird. And then we'd have other ones that would just be like, oh, it's quite like it here, actually. I don't really know why I like it. And then, one night there was one that turned up and said, oh, Suzy, let me show you this. And he had these leopard print thong underneath his outfit. And I thought, all right, I've got you then. And so it was more like that. And then there's always, doesn't really matter how many. I mean, we also employed women. We had 2 female door security. One of them used to be one of our DJs. So, there's always people that want to kind of experience life a bit more, isn't there, and want to do their job a little bit better. It's not hard, you just have to kind of engage with them on a human level and suss them out.
Yeah, I think what you're describing there is kind of what we try to do with our safer spaces, which is, our own team of people who, if something happens, we can look after them in the way that needs to be that they need to be looked after, and at a very last resort, remove somebody from that space if they're acting unsafely.
But there are other roles, isn't there, for security, and that is, like I said, flipping it a bit, and it's about looking after people.
Well, yeah,
when they're falling out of the club, and being nice to them.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the reasons why, security, I have a little bit of an issue with, because their 2 main jobs are asset protection for the venue and extension of drug laws for the police. Neither of those 2 things are looking after people. So it's about sort of taking that job and sort of remoulding it into something that's more focused towards looking after the people that are in that space. And I think that's what Wolf want to do. I had a chat with them on Sunday about it all. I think that's where they want to go. But I think as a temporary fix, because of what happened last weekend, they need to get somebody in. And if it's the same person, and if they understand the space, and they understand, how what their presence represents, because I think some people see security and they get their backs up. I mean, you see that flash of badge, and for me that's a bit of a, I don't know.
You see, I have such a different attitude, because obviously I'm a lot older, so for me, doormen were not regulated when I started working, and they were just anybody that was, could fight. And there was literally no regulation. There were no females, and they could do what they wanted, and they could beat anybody up, and they did often. My first experience in '92 was a gay boy came in the club, paid his money, walked through the door, up the stairs, through the door, and a doorman at the top of the stairs had a full-on knee-jerk homophobic reaction and just punched him in the face and broke his nose. And that was okay back then. And nobody thought that. And I went bonkers and demanded that he got sacked. And nobody knew why I was making such a fuss. And I remember, because I was standing there and I had these big silver platforms on and false eyelashes and a little pink mini dress on and a big hairpiece, and they were going, "What are you? Are you a feminist? You can't be a feminist dressed like that." Because they really, really didn't understand, because you could do that. So when they actually brought in all that regulation in the mid-90s, and they started training doormen and they started having, more women doing it, it was just like, this was a really, really good thing, because they became accountable. And obviously there were still problems, but compared to what it was like when, anything could happen to anybody, it just seems so much better to me. I've just come in tonight, the most lovely, friendly man smiling at me. I didn't feel intimidated. I just thought, I just saw that as a welcome.
He asked for my ID. I was like, whoa, I haven't had my ID asked for a long time. Sorry, Michael, I interrupted.
No, I was going to say that, it's all relative, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
But
I don't want to go back to those days.
No. But I definitely think just pointing towards sort of managing our own spaces, the people who are from that space, policing or not policing, because that's...
You can't put an agency
but
door
exactly.
security there.
Managing and looking after our own space, I think, is really important.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about making sure people are safe within a nightclub, and I hope that there are people in the audience today that don't run queer nights, but are still making notes, and they're like, we want to make our spaces more queer friendly. Please be making some notes, because it's very important. My next question is about, again, kind of going back to securing the life of queer nights. And in London, they have just started, I think it is the first LGBTQ+ promoters network. And I think it was to address that stat, 50% of clubs shutting down in the last 10 years. And I think the idea behind it is all of these different spaces across London are closing, and they never had a chance to talk to one another, to perhaps help one another out. So let's bring them all in together and see what happens. Do you think the north of England could benefit from something like this? And if it did exist, ideally, what would you like it to look like?
Obviously. I'm in a Facebook group with them all, so it does exist. But yeah, I think it would be great, and to have that as a bit of a public forum to talk about the issues that we all face, and also how we can help each other out and learn. Again, that sort of, reaching out to different collectives, or reaching out to people who are slightly, who look and sound, who are different from you, and learning from those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a healthy way to bring ideas together that. Looks after the most marginalised person, so that everyone else can benefit from that.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you, because, we just worked in a bubble, really. We didn't have any mentors, we didn't have anybody that was doing anything like what we were doing. We were really dismissed because we were two female promoters, and, so I think this kind of, and people didn't really collaborate so much back then. It was very much like, I've got my business or my whatever, and it was all kind of quite closed. So I think the whole idea of networks and collaborations is a brilliant idea. I mean, London's not the north of England, is it? Because London is a capital city, and the north of England is like Hull, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle. And they're all it couldn't. I don't know. It's not as simple as just doing something within one big city.
And maybe the issues that face one city are different to these that face another city. But yeah. There's definitely a space for something like that.
Sure. Do you see some of these things happening anyway, but in an informal capacity?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
We gossip.
Oh, you all gossip.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let's move on now. We've talked about the past. We've talked about things that we're doing today to make sure that safe spaces can be as safe as they can. Now we're looking at the future, and I'm going to go far into the future, and I'm going to talk about live streams and metaverses. As we know, the internet is a refuge for a lot of queer people around the world who might not have access to a single gay club. They might not know a single gay person. So I think in the pandemic particularly, there were lots of online parties, live streams. I know of an organization that's based in the Middle East called Micheal, and they did one live stream for queer Arabs, and so many people kind of tuned in, and they were surprised with the volume, because they're like, this is insane. And through that experience, they said, perhaps this is the future of clubbing, especially within those regions. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts on queer clubbing and how that fits into the XR universe.
Are you going there?
I mean, I'd say Love Muscle is very much the present. Do you know what I mean? There are collectives in Leeds, who are definitely more looking towards who are more progressive in their thinking, who they are. Rap Party in particular springs to mind. Don't use club space. Free parties. Why do we even need a club? Tossing out the old rules completely and just cracking on and carving something out for themselves. I think that's incredibly important. Mm-hmm. But I suppose we're doing little bits. I think the pandemic's shown us that people still aren't ready to come back into clubs. There are lots of queer people who have disabilities who don't want to be back in those spaces at the moment. So how can we cater for them? We've been working with Sable to do live streams and recordings. So just little things like that, I suppose. But I'm not the biggest fan of live, videos in club spaces. I think it does a disservice to the people in the space, or like if you're conscious that there's a camera always there. There's a limit to how much I think you can relax and let go and stuff. But yeah, definitely open to trying to make it. We're always striving to be as accessible as we can. And that is definitely through technology one of the things we can do.
Mm-hmm. Do you have
Well,
any thoughts?
I would just love to go there, because obviously we were working before there was even social media, so so completely different. But the only thing that I can kind of relate it to is in the early 2000s, over 5 years we worked out in Bosnia after there'd been a really awful war in the 90s, and a lot of ethnic cleansing, and we were invited by the British Army to go out as part of their integration programme to work with young people to try and integrate them through dance music. And they had, and this isn't about being queer, this is just about being marginalised and ignored, and like you say, having no access to nightclubs, and all these young people had grown up with no access to music, fashion, clubs, nothing. And we went out there, a whole team of us, and people literally walked 25, 30 miles just to get to the clubs that we ran, and they had nothing. And so I'm actually talking to them at the moment, because they've approached me again about doing something now that we've got this time, digital time. Could we do something not physical for the young generation, because they've got all the far right issues, they've got recruitment from Russia, they've got all sorts of problems still out there in the Balkans, and it kind of made me think a lot about and also you've got that whole thing, half of the world it's still completely illegal, and you can be murdered. So, wouldn't it be brilliant to be able to set something up? I agree with you about the live streaming events, but I would probably approach it as creating something that was specifically for these kind of
Sure.
people, so you could actually communicate with them and talk to them, and it was for them. It wasn't just like you were in Leeds having a party, you were being filmed, and then other people going to see it. It was like something much more interactive. But I am really excited about it, and it's like kind of, you know, even like my little kind of niece who's like 18, they've got this like VR headset, and the first thing when she put it on was just like, can we go to Speedqueen? You know, and I was just like really shocked.
I mean, that's an idea right there.
You know, I was
isn't
just
it?
really,
Yeah.
really shocked that, you know, there's that, and that's so, yeah. I mean, it's got to happen, hasn't it? But I don't think you could ever take away from something that happens like with your senses when you're in a physical space with other people and you don't know who you're going to meet, or and all of those feelings and smells and sounds and touch. You can never take, that's part of being human, isn't it, as well?
But again, that's also our understanding of what it means to be human, because we didn't grow
Yeah.
up with a lot of these things. Maybe, you know, 50 years down the line,
Yeah. Well, I won't
what it
be
means
here,
to be
so-
a human can be completely different.
Well, it will be,
and
yeah.
like going to a gay night just through a VR headset
Yeah.
could be the
That
future.
will be normal.
That could be the future.
That will be normal very soon. Yeah.
I think one of the things that the two people that were on before, DJ Flight and Mantra, were talking about was sort of making sure that you're bringing people up or looking for new, you know, bringing up young talent or like new talent. I think that's such an amazing way to get progressive ideas of the future. You know, people who've had a different experience than you did growing up. So you know, if you're running a club night, looking at who's in that city, going out, going to gigs, keeping an eye on who is sort of like up and coming or is doing really well, to, you know, and bringing you know, giving those people a hand up or a lift up, and taking those ideas with you and trying to keep as fresh as you can.
Get them on your TikTok team.
Yeah, but that's just, it's one of the benefits of making sure that you are looking for talent in your city.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of that. You know, you brought up loads of, you know, DJs who never really
Absolutely.
thought that
Absolutely.
were never booked anywhere else, and you were like, let's give these people
Yeah,
a
and a lot of them have
chance.
gone on to have really successful careers, and we're just, you know, there's just the city's full of talent. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's kind of, you know, everybody kind of wins. It's like a circle, isn't it? It's just important.
Yeah. Also, as an audience member, seeing someone who looks like you behind the decks makes it
Yeah.
an ever more reality.
Yeah. Or it could be you.
Exactly, yeah. But kind of just going back to, I want to unpick a little bit more about this future queer club experience. If it were to exist in this ultraverse, universe, metaverse, I don't know, lots of different ways of saying the same thing, are there any issues that we need to be conscious of?
Well, I just had a thought. It'd be brilliant for all older people who don't want to go out clubbing. You know, they've got to stand up and go to the toilet and all these things, and disabled people, like you were saying. But really, there's an older generation, you know, that are all going to be like 60 soon and 70, and, you know, have had a lifetime like myself of clubbing, and it could actually be a way for older people to really really access, you know, that kind of world that you just presume when you get older that is it becomes closed to you for lots of reasons, you know, like just for the hard physicality of it and staying up all night and all sorts of things. But it could access, it means that, you know, and I'm thinking about really elderly people, you know, like, because I worked before the pandemic in like adult daycare, like with elderly people, and like workshops, and their worlds are shut down from all sorts of things that they loved when they were young. And my generation all loved like clubbing and music and dancing, and so there's other worlds there as well, as well as the ones that you were just talking about before.
No, definitely.
People that don't live in cities.
Yeah. Were you about to say
I
something?
better do that.
No, I agree.
It's yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of this is happening at present already, and kind of what I'm trying to get to with my question is what do we need to be wary of if we were to build this universe? What are the kind of things that we could put in place to make them safe? And I know of one example in this metaverse. If someone tries to, you know, put their hand on your digital self, they just disappear, just like that. I mean, it would be nice if that happened in real life sometimes. But just those kind of things that people who are building these universes now kind of need to bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and we all experienced some of that during lockdown. I think, especially when we were trying to create these digital spaces, about people infiltrating the spaces. There were loads of quite horrific instances of people popping into spaces and sort of flash mobbing them with like not nice messages, all of that kind of stuff. I think we learned pretty hard the ways in which we could protect those spaces. And I think as those spaces develop, people will be looking to, in the best way that they can protect those spaces. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to say because
Well, they need more ethics, don't they, in the tech industry?
But yeah.
Maybe they should get you on board.
They need more ethics, you know what I mean? And they need more kind of, a much more kind of diverse set of people kind of working in that industry. Mm-hmm. That's because you don't have control of that, do you?
No. Absolutely. If you've got people who are marginalised designing web programs, they're not going to be set up for everybody, are they? I think. And that's one of the big reasons why I have such a distrust of technology and wanting to do stuff online, is because they're difficult spaces to keep safe, I suppose, because you don't know. You might keep it as safe as you possibly can, but where does that data go? Where does that live recording of that set go? You might think that you dance around in a thong to just you and your two mates, but like, where does that go? So. Yeah, I think you're dead right. Once that extra regulation, and that extends to the abuse of data throughout our whole society, I think.
Definitely. Well, I think that's the end of my questions. Yeah, thank you so much for speaking so honestly. Thank you everyone for sharing this space with us. This is the final talk of the whole series. So yeah, well done to everyone behind the team. And making this happen. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Massive thanks to Sable. Well done, everyone.